Welcome to Wisco Dice.
Welcome to Wisco Dice.
Welcome to Wisco Dice.
Hey, yo, folks, this is your host, the Cozy with the Most. I am joined by the one, the only, the Stark, the Raving, the Mad One himself. Hey, Brian, what's going on?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. We're getting into spring here and vaccinations and such, which is exciting. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. We also have the illustrious, the Meeple, the cardboard legend himself. Justin, what is going on, bud?
Hey guys, I'm doing good. Also, getting on that vaccination train. Soon to be fully vaccinated. Woohoo!
Yep. It's pretty awesome. Yeah, I've managed my full 2 weeks as of today, so woot!
Yeah, because that means we can actually start playing games again.
Yes, the
For real.
prospects of
Hopefully.
in-person gaming is becoming more realistic. Certainly, there are things to be considered and safety and all of that aside, but the prospect of being able to do in-person gaming is so exciting. Very excited for that. Today's episode is episode 80 of the Wisco Dice Tabletop Gaming Podcast, and today is April 28th, 2021, just in case you didn't know that. That's when we're recording this. And on today's episode, we will cover some of our favorite miniatures used for games, and we will also have an interview from James, who is a store manager over at Noble Knight Games. We will touch up on what we've been doing in our hobby corner for hobby and miniature painting projects. But first, let's go ahead and dive into what games we've been playing. So, Justin, it looks like you've been playing some really fun games. What have you been playing lately?
Yeah, so I finally got a chance to try out Viscounts of the West Kingdom. This is a worker placement. Well, a worker placement. Maybe it is. It's a strategy game from Garphill Games and designer Shim Phillips, and it is one that you reviewed on the blog. But I picked it up recently and got some plays in. This is the third game in the West Kingdom trilogy, which includes Architects of the West Kingdom and Paladins of the West Kingdom, both of which I had played before as well. So it's just glad to kind of get the trilogy complete. Just a couple of things to say about it. I think the main mechanic in the game is a rondel system, essentially, with a unique kind of take on it, where your Viscount, or your main sort of character, your hero, I guess, is traveling around the kingdom, which is the rondel. The game board is the rondel. Each turn, you kind of are able to decide how far along the rondel you go, which determines what actions you can take. And it's got, the kind of classic resource gathering from the other West Kingdom games. You're hiring the help of other villagers in the areas you're in to kind of boost your actions. A deck building mechanic with that too, where you're adding to a deck of characters that provide you different sort of action symbols, which determine how strong of an action you perform. So, for example, one of the actions is like a merchant action, and if you are on a space where you can perform the merchant action, you might be able to spend 2 merchant symbols to get 1 stone or something like that. I had a good time with it. I went back and took a look at your review too, and I also had some of those same game rules and rulebook issues that you kind of mentioned in your review. There are a couple things that just weren't super clear right off the bat. So, I had to do some search on the Board Game Geek rules forums to kind of clarify some things. So that might be one little sticking point. And also, you mentioned the slidey cards and the player boards. That is definitely the case. They're like really slick, glossy material, and they slide all over the place. Cool game, and I think the only other comment I kind of had is it has a unique, end game condition, I guess, where basically you have these two stacks of cards. You have debts or you have deeds, and the game ends once one of those stacks, the end of the game triggers once you deplete one of those stacks. But there's plenty of things you can do throughout the game that just don't involve removing cards from those stacks, taking debts or deeds. And so for us, my couple plays, it seemed like maybe it was longer than it needed to be. But I think that if that's the case, it seems like it's also a very customizable system where I could just say, hey, I'm only going to use 10 instead of 12 of these cards in each stack to control the length of the game. But all in all, I really like the game. Excited to play it some more.
Viscounts was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed playing that game myself. It was just more component frustrations than gameplay issues that I found when I played it the first couple of times through. So glad you enjoyed it. All right, so I played a game of On Mars from Eagle Griffin Games and by designer Vital Lacerda, who is one of the bigger name designers in the industry, well known for all of his mega crunchy games. On Mars is the only, I think, Lacerda game I have ever actually played, though, and I got suckered into it, darn you, Noble Knight, by their display of the Kickstarter version of the game by their registers while I was in playing a night Batman miniatures game. And so I immediately said, I have to have that game, and went home with On Mars. That was, I don't know, year and a half ago. We played it once, just Suzanne and I, and like it was super frustrating, and we fought through the game, and after about 4.5 hours on that first play, we finally finished it, botched a bunch of rules, and put it back in the box and let it sit on the shelf for almost a year. And we kept talking about getting it back out and giving it another go. It's such a pretty game. They have like all these the wooden meeples are like cool. Like the rover looks like a cool rover. The bots look like cool bots. The rockets look cool. All of the bits. The theme is it's this super cool game from a components perspective. But because we kind of bumbled our way through it that first time, it was really painful, and so we finally broke it out and played it again. During On Mars, you're basically playing as a group of collective players that are building a colony on Mars. So unlike a very popular title, Terraforming Mars, where you're looking at a huge chunk of the globe, you're only looking at this itty bitty little spot on Mars where you're basically making various habitats that are going to produce things like food and minerals and all sorts of other resources that you would need, as you would think, to live on Mars. There's some scientists that you can recruit to help you, and there's like an orbital space station. You can travel between the orbital space station. You can travel to the colony on Mars. Your action selection changes based on where you are in the game. And as you collectively build on the habitat, or on the actual colony habitat itself, the habitat itself, its level will actually increase, which is one of the potential end game triggers. There's also several missions that are on the game that are also end game conditions, and then like timing when you're going to be on the space station and when you're going to be on the colony, and what actions you do and when you do them. It's just a massive brain burn. And so going back and playing it a second time, we ended up having to kind of reteach it, relearn it, watch some YouTube videos on how to play it. And there's some good ones out there for how to play it. We sat down and played it again. I think we really enjoyed it. We definitely enjoyed it more than we did the first time. I'll tell you that entirely. I think this is a good game, but there were a couple of things that for us, it just wasn't a perfect game. And we do enjoy a lot of really crunchy games. I think one of the big ones for us was that the iconography and the look of some of the way the symbols and things work. There's a lot of iconography in the game, and that it didn't seem to be representative iconography wise of many other titles that we've played. And so it was hard to relate things like water and mineral and to remember, oh yeah, that symbol is this and this symbol is that. I don't think it was terrible, but it was enough different that it made it a bit of a challenge to constantly be trying to remember what all these icons were. I wish there was actual text on some of the components that would tell you what these things are to help with that, but obviously I think it's printed with a way that, hey, we can print a bunch of components and then just give you different rules for different languages and not have to worry about reprinting all of the English pieces. But it's a cool game, and thematically it's awesome. Beautiful, pretty on the table, takes a ton of table real estate. If you are into hardcore crunchy Euro games, this is definitely a game for you. Justin, I think you've played this game before?
I have played this once. I don't remember a lot of the specifics. I remember the timing of moving between the orbiting space station and the planet and that determining your actions being an interesting sort of mini puzzle that you had to deal with during the game, and when you can sort of send guys back up to the space station to take actions and when you can bring them down, and the timing of how that kind of rotates around was really interesting. Yeah, I remember liking it. I remember being really complex, but yeah, I think like you said, thematically it's really good. Most of the time, like every kind of mechanic makes sense to improving your habitat or roving around the planet to find resources or expanding, your area.
That was a kicker, I think, with the game is that, well, I thought, it's definitely a crunchy game. It's definitely a crunchy Euro game. I didn't think it was like, oh my God, complex mechanically. I think, or even, it's definitely not the most complex game I've ever played. It's just, I just reviewed Hellertau, which is Uwe Rosenberg's one of his here. I think it's his most recent game, and I feel like that game was far more complex, but because it's so much of the same like iconography from like even going tracing all the way back to like Agricola,
Yeah.
that it was like, oh well, I know what that symbol means, and I know what that symbol means. And oh yeah, that symbol looks just like the game component for that symbol. So hey, I've got it all together and I know what everything means. This game doesn't quite do that, so it makes you everything was so awesome thematically, but it took you that extra brain crunch of putting together symbols on the board with physical components and theme that was going on. So it helped with it, definitely aided with the immersion, but then it made me like lose track mechanically necessarily of what I needed to do.
For a number of plays to really get the feel.
I'll almost assuredly have a second play of it here, a third play of it here before this episode goes out. So, because the game table needs to get freed up for other gaming activities. All right, let's go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, we're going to pop into our interview with James. And then when we wrap that up, we'll get into our main topic. All right, and we're back. And we are joined by James from Noble Knight Games, and
Hello.
I've got Justin here as part of the interview crew. So,
Hey guys.
Hey, so with that, let's go ahead, Justin. Why don't you take us away and get us started?
Yeah, so we are welcoming James Zenham from Noble Knight Games. Thank you for joining us today.
Extremely happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So just do introductions. Let us know a little about yourself. What's your role at Noble Knight Games?
At Noble Knight Games, I'm the lead of the store end of the operation. And to really understand that, though, I have to explain the operation of Noble Knight is actually a giant. The best way to think about it is it's a giant warehouse that happens to have a store attached to it.
Yeah.
So we're a multi-person operation. I think we're over 60 employees at this point. We grew very quickly over 2020. And so my end of it is the public-facing end of it, which is actually the smallest, probably the smallest team outside of a few specialty departments. But I run the walk-in end. I run in the end where you come in and do your traditional shopping.
Awesome. And so my understanding is Noble Knight started as more of a online sales. Is the move to a retail location more recent, or has there always been sort of that retail front as well?
Actually predated online sales, which to me
Oh,
blew my mind when I learned that. It started in 97 in Janesville, Wisconsin, and it was a cataloging business. It was, that they made their sales via catalog. The owner, Aaron Leader, would buy people's old game collections, and it was just him and a couple of employees, and they would just make their own catalogs, mail them out. Hey, we've got all these classic out of print games. By 97, we're at the dying days of AD&D.
yeah.
This is pre my time in wargaming, so one of you guys would know what editions of Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40K were in at that point.
That's a Ben
But-
question.
Actually, don't know off the top of my head. We're probably, I don't know.
That's probably about the time I started 40K, but I don't remember.
I mean, I was 16 and not paying attention to that stuff.
Yeah.
At the time. So it was a cataloging business. Then it became an online business. And by the time it left Janesville, which was 2018, it had a very small storefront, and most everything was scattered over 4 different warehouses and the owner's basement. It just couldn't really operate well that way. So our current location is in Fitchburg, Wisconsin, which is part of the greater Madison area. So saying it's in Madison is close enough.
Yeah, I think it counts. It definitely counts as being Madison, I think.
Sorry if there's any Fitchburg diehards listening.
Yeah. A close neighbor at the very least.
Yes.
And if anybody has not been to the Noble Knight store, it is a beautiful location. Really, really nice. Big gaming space. Really cool. Definitely would recommend if you haven't checked it out to go and do that. So
Thank you very much.
yeah, you kind of give us that little background of Noble Knight. So what is your kind of gaming history, or what got you into the hobby? You mentioned wargaming. What's your background?
I actually was primarily just a diehard RPG guy in junior high and high school, and started with AD&D, which I think almost everybody from my generation did. And I eventually found a store called Pegasus Games in Madison, Wisconsin. That's where I got all my role-playing games. And eventually, I started working there back in 2006. And that's how I started professionally. But also at the time, I was living in a house full of geeks who did a weekly game night. And that's when I got into board games and card games. And that's when I really started broadening my horizons. And what was supposed to just be a part-time job to get me through the rest of college turned out to be something I never left. And so when Pegasus Games was originally going to close in 2019, but then got a new owner 3 or 4 days after our going away party, I had gotten hired at Noble Knight. And then a few months later, we had a pandemic.
Yeah. Surprise.
Yeah, it's the weirdest year of a job I've ever had, that's for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. Given that there is that weirdness, we kind of want to ask, like, what's a average day for you working at a big game store like this? What's your day-to-day look like?
A lot different than I ever expected. So for my basis of comparison, when I was working at Pegasus Games, which it was a little bit of everything. I had to be the manager. I had to be the janitor. I had to put in orders. I had to check those orders in. I had to help with the customers. And then, of course, manage our small team. And now I have a job where we don't have organized play, obviously, which is very unfortunate. It was one of my favorite things. And hopefully, hey, there's a light at the end of that tunnel. But now the job is much more focused. I don't have to do that inventory check-in anymore. I don't have to do the ordering anymore, which is fantastic. I don't have to be the janitor anymore, except once in a while, the small stuff.
Yeah.
But like I said, we're a 60-person operation now. So what my job is, which I was not expecting, and it's a wonderful new challenge after doing this for 14 years, is I'm one of the center points between my team and this giant business, giant small business.
Yeah.
That includes a warehouse team and a receiving team and a cataloging team dedicated to new items and a cataloging team dedicated to used items and a team dedicated to collectible card games. So the leadership of each department is basically responsible to make sure all these disparate teams run smoothly together. So what is the typical day? A whole lot of back and forth between different voices. I'm very fortunate that I've got a small team that doesn't need to be micromanaged much. They know their job as the retail side, and I can just say, okay, get these three things done today and be prepared for something unexpected to happen. And I'm going to go make sure nothing unexpected happens.
So it sounds like you're glad that you aren't doing the janitorial stuff as well. But what's like your favorite part of what you're doing right now, the most satisfying part of your job?
So I don't think it's controversial to say we've all had a really, really bad 14 months. I don't think that's controversial to say at all.
Nope.
I've made the joke very quickly when we had to start expanding that we're not the frontline fighters, but we're certainly the bards. So the favorite part of my job is that we're selling morale boosts. Basically, we're selling games, we're selling fun, we're selling things to keep people entertained at home. And I think mainstream people are finally starting to catch on to how important that actually is. How important games and entertainment actually are for folks. So that's my favorite part.
Yeah, that's awesome. I if I can add to that, I
Please.
think there's a uniqueness in sort of board games and tabletop gaming and war games is there's like a direct social aspect. Like you could consider like a video game maybe similar, but there's a connection between people that you get with board games and war games and tabletop gaming. I mean, obviously the pandemic has put a strain on all those kinds of activities for everybody, and it is important. And I think that sort of social aspect too is key there.
Absolutely, and that's I think that's why I haven't really walked away from doing this for 14 years, and why that's only become even stronger as my favorite thing to do. Is like, yes, I sell fun. We need a lot of that right now. Here you go, take it.
Yeah. Does working in the games industry and dealing with games and the stock and the whole business of the industry, does that make it harder for you to enjoy games and playing games in your personal life, or maybe make it better?
It does, but it took me a while to realize. I think it was more the hours than anything else. If you work retail, you don't generally get like your full weekend, and you don't always get the 9 to 5 because you've got to work. You've got like 12 hours or 13 hours, depending on how long your business is open in a day. So it does make it harder, and it's not that I get home and I think, oh, I never want to see that again. And I want to look at games for the rest of the night. It's more that I get home and I go, well, who can I get together with? well, no, that person's got his family and his kids are going to bed in 2 hours. And, that person's got to go to bed early because they work at 7 in the morning and things like that. So
Yeah.
it does, but it's mostly the odd hours that I think retail brings to anyone.
Yep.
But that's okay. That's okay.
I mean, I imagine there's still some benefits to working in a game store and being interested in games.
One or two.
Yeah. What kinds of games are you interested in? What are your personal interests in games? What's your stuff you really get excited about?
I mean, that's in so many ways. That's almost like saying, "What's your favorite breath of air you just took?" Stole that line from Jerry Seinfeld. Please don't think I'm clever. I plagiarized it. Like when I first got in, like I said, I was just the role playing games guy. That was my big thing. Was give me as many different types of role playing games as you can because I wanted to experience that variety. And then that need for variety opened. Like I said, I was living in a house with geeks that had a weekly board game and card game night, so I got into that. And I had worked at Pegasus Games for a couple years, insisting I can't paint. Guys, I'm never going to be able to paint. I was the least artistic kid imaginable. And then one day they sat me down and they said, okay, here, you don't even have to buy anything. Just try this. And now I've got a dedicated paint room. Right.
Nice.
And the only things I have avoided have been collectible games, just because I sink so much money into everything else. Since I am into, I do like board games and I do like card games and I do like miniature games, and say, okay, I've got to cut it off somewhere.
Draw the line, yeah.
Yeah. So
fair enough.
Yeah. Saying one of my favorites is just yes, little of everything.
We've done pretty much the same thing to Justin in regards to miniatures. We've already sucked him into buying paints now. He's traditionally a board gamer and RPGer, and so we've sucked him into buying paints. And you accomplished painting your first figure just a little bit ago in what ages?
Yeah, no, I mean,
So-
it's probably 20 years, something like that, since I even touched some paint. But yeah, I mean,
Us
there's so many.
miniature guys.
Sorry, go ahead.
Us miniature guys know how to corrupt you and get you to suck you in. First minis for free.
Well, there's so many cool. I mean, there are so many cool aspects to. I mean, like board games, yes, like card games, and like there's so many cool things you can check out. And I appreciate somebody who's also saying, hey, James is like, they got to draw the line somewhere, know where your limits are. That's something I got to do too.
Yeah, and what I did like, and this is how they suckered you into gaming, and I think Ben had a little bit of influence in this, but not too much, was pointing out you don't have to get into war games, but all these board games are starting to get these interesting, fun little miniatures. You can just paint those.
Yeah.
And that's where the downward spiral started into getting into certain war games. So,
aren't you, Ben?
yes.
Well, I'll take credit for that. I mean, once you got the paints, what's the big deal? Just go buy that starter box for the next game you want to try out, that miniatures game. You're like, oh, those models are really cool. I've been drooling over them for ages. I might as well buy them. I got all the paints and the brushes now.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think as long as I already have X, that's the most common signpost on the slippery slope. As long as I have this, I may as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's the upsell, right?
Indeed it is. I backed a Kickstarter for a role-playing game called Sentinel Comics. It's based on one of my favorite card games, which is Sentinels of the Multiverse. And so I've been gearing up for that role-playing game. I did run 2 sessions at Online Cons last year at MythCon, which is out of Montreal, and out of GameholeCon, which moved online, but it's normally here in Madison, Wisconsin. From the miniatures end, I've been getting into finally painting a giant backlog for a game called Shadows of Brimstone, this name will probably most sense to Ben. It's a lot like someone took the old Warhammer Quest board game, then slapped Lovecraftian monsters and an Old West theme to it. That's putting it charitably. Or you can say they took the role-playing game Deadlands and filed all the serial numbers off and turned it into a board game.
I've seen some cool sandworm minis from that game. I think they're like a sandworm kind of thing.
Yes. I mean, yeah, there's absolutely some Tremors influence in there as well.
Yeah.
So those are the two that I've been gearing up the most for. Like, okay, at some point, I could do the RPG more over Discord, which I'm planning on doing soon. But that tabletop game, no, when I launch it, I want to have several dozen miniatures painted and ready to go for that board game as soon as I can.
Nice.
So yeah, those are my top two currently.
Thanks. Sentinels. What was the name of the Sentinels RPG? Sentinel Comics?
Yeah, the Sentinel Comics role-playing game. It's based on the Sentinels of the Multiverse card game, which I think for close to 10 years has been one of my favorite card games ever.
Yeah, that's a big one out there. I played that one a few times too. Maybe a similar question here. What is maybe a favorite game or kind of a go-to game that you will tell customers about on a regular basis, or if it's Shadows of Brimstone or something else, like what's your favorite game to pull others into to get them some excited about something?
It's fun. I would never ever recommend to someone to start with Shadows of Brimstone is the big thing. And with Sentinels of the Multiverse, or Sentinel Comics, with someone interested in role-playing games, I don't think I would actually recommend them to start with that one either. Like these are complicated things that require a big investment of time up front. But for roping people in, oh man, how much do you want me to say? I think we're at a great place. I think we're at the most beginner-friendly version of Dungeons and Dragons ever. So when people come and start asking about, oh, I've heard things about Dungeons and Dragons, or I've heard things about role-playing games, I think the current edition is the most accessible it's ever been. So that is absolutely one of my favorites. And I couldn't always say that about D&D, like to get people interested in that. And when it comes to board games, we're at a point where now we have this, I think, deluge of choices for getting people in who are not, I've heard this, the Beyond Monopoly games. What are those? So one of my current favorites is a game called Splendor, because I can pitch it by pointing out, hey, the rule book is 2 double-sided pages. That's it. And it's got these wonderful chips in it to represent the resources that are, big, and they make the lovely, clack, clack sounds as you drop them together. So it's got that tactile satisfaction, but it's easy to teach and it's visually interesting. And you can pick it up and you can play it with 2 people, or you can play it up to 4 people. And it is one of those games that plays really well with the full spread of players. And that's most of a family there, right? I mean, that's the important part, is how quickly can we get mom, dad, and 2 of the kids, or one of the parents and all the kids together around the table. So yeah, Splendor is one of my favorites to get people into that. When it comes to our war games, I know Ben and I here. Ben, I know you got big into the knight models with the Batman miniature game. I gotta say, I think Marvel Crisis Protocol has gotten a little bit of an edge on it in terms of beginner friendliness, though.
Definitely agree.
And so that's another one of my favorites to recommend, just in terms of getting most of the models assembled is very easy. Understanding the game is on the onset very easy. And to be clear, none of those 3 games I've mentioned are shallow games. I don't want to think that, oh yeah, they're easy to learn because there's nothing to them. No. These are games that I've played with veteran miniature players or board game players or role players. They just have the most gradual learning curve into the complexities that are strictly optional, that you don't even have to get into. So yeah, I think those are three of my current favorites for getting people into the various hobbies right there.
Yeah, great recommendations. Thank you.
Of course.
And like you were saying before, it more and more people in the mainstream are coming into the hobby. I mean, I think probably especially board games, and there are just so many great options for new players or just playing with your family. I mean, uh, uh, so much, it's kind of a golden age right now. I think people throw that term around a little bit for board games and stuff, and the mainstream is actually paying attention. So you get these awesome things like Splendor. It's just so easy to teach, and like I could pick up Marvel Splendor and teach it to my 5-year-old probably, and he would be, you know, just pleased to bits to do it. So we have been talking about our favorite miniatures that for board games, your miniatures games, and war games. So what are your maybe favorite or top 3, awesome miniatures, maybe that you painted or just that you really think are cream of the crop miniatures out there?
So I'm going to start with my personal favorite, which is also like my Everest. I doubt I'll ever actually get to it. A couple years ago, there was a Kickstarter for a game by Cool Mini or Not called Cthulhu Death May Die. And one of the stretch goals for Kickstarter only, or optional buys, excuse me, not stretch goals, was a very large Cthulhu miniature. Like if your average miniature is about this big, right? This Cthulhu, I can't even show a great radio, obviously, if your average miniature is about this big.
So for a normal miniature, 1.5 inches or something, how big is this thing? Yeah,
it's 2 feet tall at least. So like it's Cthulhu to scale.
Yeah.
And that's the centerpiece of my office. It's directly across when I walk into my painting office, my little hobby corner. The first thing I see, just kind of sitting there looking at me like, someday you're going to attempt this, and you know it.
I was going to ask if you.
Happy.
I do have an airbrush, thankfully, but even that, like, I've got a detailed airbrush and a fine detail airbrush, and both of those, I think, I don't even want to think about priming this with those. I need something like one of those. I need a car airbrush just to get the first layer of primer on this thing.
Yeah, I've got a Badger. I don't remember the model of it is, but it's got a big glass bottle that sits underneath it. I picked it up for terrain. It's actually, back when I was running Merry Mayhem, I did a lot of wargame terrain. 20 plus tables of Warhammer Fantasy terrain. You paint quite a bit, so it's definitely a project that we have confidence that you can actually do, and hopefully once it's accomplished, we'll be able to see great pictures of it online, and it might even make guest appearances at Noble Night or something.
Well, and now that I've talked about it on this podcast, now I've kind of changed myself to eventually getting it done, haven't I?
We'll hold you to it.
If I had that for the number of projects that I said I was going to do and have like partially started, or let's not talk about my current American Army project for Bolt Action that's not even half done. But yeah, it's I don't know that saying it on air makes it a reality, but sometimes maybe that's a good motivator.
We'll see. Now that the weather's getting nice too, because this is not something I'm going to be able to even paint halfway indoors. I'm going to have to do so much of it just outside in open air. So I'm rapidly running out of excuses, is I think what I'm saying here. But beyond that, I think one of my favorite things about just the fact that we're getting so much better at inexpensive miniatures that can still be made with really good details. I've been a Star Wars mark since the 80s, so I think one of my favorites are just everything produced by the Imperial Assault line is just really nice. These are really cool board game miniatures, so most of them don't even need to be assembled, but they still look really cool while they're painted up, and it's just great to get to see all that on a board game, and know that you got kids now that they didn't understand. They're never gonna understand the gloopy, melty face stormtroopers that we had as kids, I think, and the things that looked like it came out of those molds from the zoo, but on a much smaller scale. Yep, there's your board game pieces. So to me, that's a wonderful tickle in the childhood to see all these really cool Star Wars miniatures ready to go right out of the box for people to play with.
Yeah, I have played some Imperial Assault with Ben, and seeing an ATST come onto the field with is definitely gets you in the nostalgia, the Star Wars nostalgia. Big old ATST walks up, and you gotta just, what are we gonna do?
The nostalgia and then the fear when you realize Ben just put an ATST against you.
Exactly.
Well, the best tale of that one was the second time you guys encountered Vader, because the first time you walked him pretty good because it was like the Force Vision Vader kind of thing, but the second time you just butchered y'all. And of course, it was the final game of the thing, and not to give a whole lot away, but I was very delighted because I had taken many losses in a row, and you guys were beyond overconfident.
That's fair, yeah.
I think that's how they encountered Vader in Rebels as well, though, beyond overconfident until he made his premiere in that cartoon.
Oh, it was just like the Rebel scene. It was great. And there was a hero, and there was a hero, and there was a hero. I'm swinging my arms around like Vader. It was pretty good. I'm very happy with that moment.
We can see the joyous revenge on your face right now, I think. So.
Imperial Assault is such a great game. Not to get off topic because we never do that, but as the Overlord, you tend to lose far more than you win. And so when you get a win, it's particularly, I think, as the heroes power up, it feels so rewarding. And to be able to, I don't think I had won a game in probably 6 or 7 games at that point, maybe more. And so to get that, hey, we're at the final mission, and I got the, not only did I get the win, but it was just the heroes just were jaw dropped. It was it was a total TPK, total party wipe, total party kill. And it was in no time, and they were just all stunned.
You got to do the hallway scene from Rogue One as if all the main characters were in the hallway rather than a bunch of rebel soldiers.
Yep. Except that in Rogue One, the heroes are all struggling right up until the end when everything blows up. There was no hero struggling for the last probably 4 or 5 sessions of games.
Our overconfidence was our weakness.
So. It was good. All right. So I think that got us through everything, unless, James, you had another miniature you wanted to share with us.
Yeah. Okay. So as long as you guys are going to let me gush about my favorite toys to paint and whatnot, my other biggest fandom since I was a kid was Fallout. So just the Fallout miniature game, getting my own super mutants to paint and my own vault dwellers and raiders, that's also been a lot of fun. And that's the studio Modiphius doing that one. So that's, well, I mean, and I think this is actually interesting because you just talked about, Ben, how great of a game Imperial Assault is. It's not just somebody slapped a Star Wars coat of paint on a really lousy set of rules. And what I love about the Fallout miniature game is it does feel like you are playing not a version of the Fallout video game, but you are absolutely feel like, oh yeah, this is how a fright or a skirmish in Fallout would go based on all the games that have come before this. So we're really lucky. I think we're living in this era where people now care about not just getting the quick cash grab of like, all right, this is a name, this is a popular name in media, so people will immediately grab the product. Now it's like, all right, how do we capture the experience of this product in this board game or in this war game or even in this card game? I had an amazing experience where the Die Hard board game is actually a fantastic little asymmetrical one versus many board game. And it could not exist if it wasn't the Die Hard IP at the same time. So yeah, we're spoiled that way, I think.
Going
True.
back, thinking back to generationally to the games and when you bought a game when I was a kid, which wasn't that long ago, by the way, I'm not quite that old. But when you bought a game and it had an IP stamped to it, it was so garbage 98% of the time. Like there was just it was so bad. It was like buying Atari ET games that you this might as well just fill a landfill because they were so poor. And then there were some gems out there, and I do remember Hero Quest. I had a copy of it, and I only played it by myself, but I had a copy, and I remember there were a few gems out there as far as board games were concerned, but it really is wonderful in this day and age to see all of these games, varying difficulties, complexities, from very beginner, family friendly, to very complex, and across all of the different genres of gaming, whether it's card or board or tabletop, miniature or RPGs, to be able to bring people in and bring more people into the hobby. It's such a special time to be a part of, and I'm very excited about it.
Absolutely.
Always cool stuff too. Yep.
So, anyways, I want to just thank James so much for coming onto the show today, being a part of this episode, being part of our 80th episode of Wisco Dice. I can't believe we've done 80 of these shows now, and thank you guys for listening. Make sure if you're in the market for used games, new games, whether you're in the Madison, Wisconsin greater area or anywhere in the U.S., head over to nobleknight.com and go ahead and look for purchases. There's great deals on things. They run sales all the time. And if you happen to be in the Madison area, either traveling, visiting, or you live here just all the time, swing by the store. It's a beautiful facility. You get caught right away with the big castle on the front of this massive building. And when you walk in, you're just floored by how clean, how large, what the selection is on the shelves, the two computers right up at the front where you can, look at their entire inventory. And if you find something there, they can actually go get it. I remember going to the Janesville store and you'd be like, well, we'll get it to you tomorrow because it was in one of the 4 warehouses or possibly basements. And so it's just a great shopping experience. And if you have any questions, all the staff are knowledgeable and are happy to help. And thank you, James, for making sure you have the front of the store there is such a great experience for everyone when we go in.
Thank you so much. You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. And Ben, quick to your point there, though, I'm going to do the standard, hey, I've got to plug a thing. We do ship worldwide, and if you're in the United States, the lower 48 states, we ship free after $149. And if you are getting those big board games like the Imperial Assault, or you're a war gamer, especially looking at 40K in Age of Sigmar, you reach that 149 pretty darn quick. So it is not difficult to reach the free shipping level at all. So yeah, please check us out online or come visit our storefronts. We're open 7 days a week, even now and soon. Hopefully by the end of the summer, fall. This is not a promise, but hopefully soon. Return to in-person gaming. We'll see.
And with that, let's go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, the rest of the show. We're back, and we wanted to dive into our hobby corner here. So let's start with what miniature hobby projects we've been working on. And Brian, why don't you go ahead and let us know what you've been doing?
I had a little bit of progress this month. I can't believe it's been a whole month with the little bit of progress I've made. I'm still working on my VC21 project, as I called it, painting up some zombies. I did wrap up the ones I was working on in the last episode, like right away after that. And then I have the next 5 going, but I was trying to think of why I didn't get much progress done. And I think just with the nice weather, I've been kind of doing some house projects and stuff outside the last couple weekends. So still slow going. I hope I don't have to change it to the VC21 meaning 21 years project, but hopefully it'll pick up and I'm still doing good painting those zombies. How about you, Ben? What have you got going?
I would say it feels like you've been working on that project for 21 years already. So what's another 21?
If you think about when I actually started Warhammer, yeah, I'm almost there probably. I don't want to do the math. Dang, it probably is pretty close to 21 years actually. That's terrible. So it's true. It's true both ways with the name.
So anyways, yes, I actually, so I was super excited for the new Warhammer Quest. Like, so Warhammer Quest Curse City, I'm a huge fan of the old Warhammer Quest, and when Silver Tower came out and it was the first re-release of Warhammer Quest, I was really excited, but kind of watched it get played at a couple of Warhammer tournaments back then and events, and was just like, yeah, I don't really care for the way it's been really Age of Sigmarized, and it just doesn't feel quite like the old Warhammer Quest. So I'll pass on buying it. So I never got it. And then I think they released another variant off of Warhammer Quest that was for basically the same vein. I just don't remember what it was called. And then recently they announced this Curse City. Now there's a bunch of drama out there about Curse City, and it's selling out basically everywhere, including Games Workshop's website, super fast, and there just not being enough copies made for how many that people wanted. And I don't know how much that was of whatever. The price point was pretty ridiculously high at like $200 or something crazy. I didn't ask them when they ran my credit card for it. They're like, hey, you owe us like $250 with whatever other gaming purchases I was buying, and I was like, oh, I spent more money than I thought I was. Whatever, I don't care. Now we know how my spending philosophy is when it comes to games. They just tell me a number, and I take their word for it. But I did get a copy. Misty Mountain Games here in Madison made it super easy to get. I just walked in. The guy hadn't even unpacked them from the case. He's like, yeah, we have them for sale. Here you go. And I don't know, there was 3-4 copies of it there. So I got it, took it home. I immediately built the entire kit. Took me about a week to build everything. I don't assemble particularly fast. Never been something I've super enjoyed. And then, so now that it's assembled, I actually started painting it. I have 5 of the zombies from the set painted. I'm probably half, 2/3 of the way through 5 of the skeletons. This episode will be out. I'll have those done, and probably into the next set of models that are from that kit. So progress is definitely being made, and the sculpts are all really cool. They're maybe a little two-dimensional in the sculpts. They feel very much like, hey, somebody drew the artwork and then they threw that into a 3D rendering modeling application. And while yes, the models are 3D, they feel very two-dimensional. But otherwise, they are super cool, and I am enjoying painting and working on plastics that are this detailed and this cool. And I'm looking forward to at some point playing Warhammer Quest with fully painted models.
Sounds very cool.
Nice.
So, Justin, did I hear that you had some hobby stuff you'd been working on?
2 episodes. 2 episodes is all it took, you guys, to lure me into the hobby corner. Yeah. So I after we kind of talked last time, I was thinking about some of the minis and the board games I have, and other, I have a couple sort of D&D kind of miniatures lying around, and I was like, you know what, let's do this. I went and got a kind of beginner painting kit. So I got a Reaper's Bones Learn to Paint kit, the layer up version, which has 3 minis in it, like a wizard and a halfling and a guy, kind of desert guy carrying a chest. And it, comes with, a small set of Reaper colors and some brushes. And I did, I've been starting research into, techniques for beginner painters and the things you need to know and the tools you need. So I have taken the first step, and I've gotten a little progress on one of the miniatures. I started with this sort of a cloaked elfin wizard that I started working on, basically just completely following they have an instruction booklet in there that's really nice. It's just like step by step. All right, put this base coat of color down, start with the large areas and then move to a smaller brush, that kind of thing. Do these sections first and paint all this base color, then go and do the shadows, starting with this slightly darker color, then make this even darker color, like, add the shadows and those kind of layers, because it's the layer up kit. And then it has you switch back and go to the highlights and say, all right, now mix this highlight color, starting with, some of the base color and a lighter color, and you mix that up. And literally just step by step is like, here's the colors to use, here's where to put them. So that, like, as a beginner, basically, I haven't painted in probably 21 years, right? So it's really nice to kind of have that, like, literal step by step, make this color, use 2 drops of dragon blood red or whatever the color was, I forget, and 1 drop of this color. So that was really nice.
Oh wow, it gets that specific about it.
Yeah, it tells you, and then it'll be like, add 1 drop of this, 1 drop of this, and 1 drop of water, because you want it to flow into the cracks a little. It's a shadow, or they kind of talk about an ink, I guess, or you would call it, I forget the term.
Wash.
A wash, thank you. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, where you kind of make your own wash and let that seep into the cracks a little bit, but not cover the area of the thing. So I started working with that, and hopefully I'll have something cool to show in a little bit. I'm literally just starting with these 3 figures that came in the box, and more or less exactly following these beginner painting instructions, and we'll see how it turns out. So
yeah, it's really
sounds
interesting
really
to
cool.
see. Like, yeah, sounds really cool. It's really interesting to see and hear the difference in how painting and layering painting is kind of being taught in this, because the very traditional way to do layering is start with your darkest tone, then go to your mid-tone, and then go to your highlight tone,
interesting.
and then maybe wash it at the end and move on to your next color. And that's how you traditionally, like back in the late 90s, early 2000s, that was kind of the way you did things. That was the general like Games Workshop way to do it, and to an extent, I think still is.
Interesting. Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean,
cool.
again, I just followed the instructions, and yeah, you'll have to teach me if they're wrong, and I'll try a different way. But I'm just interested to kind of learn, and like I said, I've been watching videos too, and seeing like there's a lot of videos that are like things I wish I knew when I started painting and that kind of stuff. So I've been checking some of that out, and also researching like what kind of tools people use. Like wet palettes seem to be a big deal, and I actually got one of those as well, just because it's like I kind of believe in the right tools for the job or whatever. So just got one of those right away. And, yeah. I'm gonna see where it goes.
Recommend the wet palette. That's a amazing tool. It's probably one of the bigger game-changing tools, particularly if you're starting to blend paints and colors, and you're painting any level of or number of models in quantity. It's super useful. It's also a bit useful for creating those blends because maybe you use a little less water. The Reaper paints are pretty good consistency straight out of the pot, but the always water your paints is a big thing too. That straight thickness of paints out of the pot is oftentimes too thick.
Yeah. Well, and what sold me on it really was the idea that I could preserve even a fairly small amount of paint for a longer time, because I'm not going to be doing like as much painting necessarily since I'm starting off. So I don't have to worry about my paint drying out as fast. I could set something aside, and I think maybe I left a little bit of paint on overnight, and it was almost totally fine the next day with this wet palette. So that for me, it was just like, hey, I can preserve my paint a little longer since I don't know how much to use necessarily, or I don't have a ton of paint, as a stock. So that's a nice thing for me. That's part of what sold me on it.
Yep. No, it's I've been working on these 5 skeletons. I'm working on the red layering and highlighting. Have been doing that, probably since like 10 o'clock today, on and off through the day, and I've never went back and put new paint on my palette, and I've actually had my palette actually open most of the day too, so it's not like it's been covered or anything, so stays just fine. Every once in a while you'll get a little weird mold or something in the wet palette. Just take a little dish soap or something and on the sponge with the water, just a very, very tiny drop, get it kind of sudsy, rinse it out good, and then refill, put a new paper on it, fill it up with water, you're good to go.
Oh yeah.
Eventually, if the sponge will need to be replaced, but it's not one of those things that like, oh hey, every month or two I need to replace it. It's like I replace mine like maybe once a year.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, painting. That's cool. It's cool you're getting into it, and we're excited to see those first works. And just remember, your first works versus your 400th work, there will be significant difference in style, technique, and your satisfaction with your finished product.
Awesome.
All right, let's dive into our main topic then. For today, we are going to talk more about miniatures, and we're actually going to talk about what our favorite miniatures are that are produced. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in first here and lay out. I got 2 miniatures that I wanted to feature here. I just had to mention this one. It's not my like all-time favorite. I mean, I haven't even gotten it out of the box and started building it yet. So there's that, but it's a historical model, and it's actually more like a model kit. You get those RC cars or whatever. It's really one for really that, but it's got it because it also works for the game Cruel Seas. It's actually the model that they advertise on the Warlord Games website for this. If you wanted to represent this particular ship in the game world, Cruel Seas. Cruel Seas is a World War II naval combat for really tiny small coastal boats, really, and basically glorified jet boats and that kind of thing. So there weren't jet boats back then, but high powered, maybe 4 or 5 crew members with a machine gun and a couple of torpedoes or something like that were, basically there for coastal defense, and maybe had enough armament to take on a small sub or other coastal craft if there was like landings or whatever. And so this is the model itself, to kind of lay all that background. The model itself is World War II Liberty ship, the SS Jeremiah O'Brien from Trumpeter Models. It's a 1/350th scale model of the ship. Compared to the other Cruel Seas models, this thing is enormous. It's like 1.5 feet long from the bow to the stern, I think is what the naval terms are. Anyways, from the front to the back of the of the model. So in comparison, like the other ships in this game, or the other boats in this game, are like 2 to 3 inches long normally. So this is like massive ship. And that gives you like the Jeremiah O'Brien compared to like say a destroyer is probably about destroyer size, but like when you get into battleship and aircraft carrier for World War II, it's actually a relatively smaller ship. So you can just kind of get the scale of what Cruel Seas is in comparison. But the reason I got to mention this, the reason that this model is so cool, is I actually got the opportunity when I was in San Francisco to go aboard the SS Jeremiah O'Brien. Actually, got to tour it. It was the engines for this particular ship were are the engines that you hear for the steam engines in Titanic. I'm not sure if they've reopened it yet. Very recently, there was a big fire on Pier 37 in San Francisco. Very fortunately, because when you go out to the dock where the ship is docked, there's also a World War II submarine that you can tour, but there's a giant warehouse on the one side of it, and that warehouse went on fire, and the flames from that warehouse flew up over the top. You could actually see in the pictures the flames flew up over the top of the Jeremiah O'Brien. The San Francisco firefighters and other people that responded were able to control that fire and save it from damaging the ship in any level of extensive damage. But that thing serviced D-Day. It serviced a ton of stuff. It's one of a very few Liberty ships that are still afloat in the world today, and it's still a fully functional ship. So I just had to call it out. It's awesome. I'm super excited to at some point get that ship painted up, and I will maybe never use it as an actual gaming piece, but it's a super cool model and it had to get mentioned. But my all-time favorite model is the Carmine Dragon from Forge World. My version came with the Elspeth, the rider. She has like a scythe and rides the dragon. I actually didn't build my Carmine Dragon with her on it, but that dragon is so cool, and was the very first Forge World model I ever bought. I painted it up. It sits on the shelf in the game room. It's just one of those models that's just amazing, and I had to mention it as a mention here.
So is Forge World? Hey, yeah, no, it's just a quick question. The uneducated person here in the miniature side of things, is Forge World like a manufacturer or a game, or wasn't sure?
So Forge World is a subsidiary of Games Workshop.
Okay.
They used to do, back in the Warhammer days, when Brian and I were playing Warhammer Fantasy on a regular basis, and Warhammer Fantasy was a thing. Forge World did all of like these like small print run resin models. They didn't do a lot for fantasy back in the day until this run when they did this Carmine Dragon, and so they started getting into more monsters, and eventually came out with Chaos Dwarfs for the Warhammer Fantasy line. But they did like all these tons of like alternate shoulder pads, alternate vehicle upgrades for different factions for 40K. all of that came out of the Forge World, and it was all only way you could get Forge World stuff for the most part was to order it direct right from Forge World's website and have them ship it over to you via exorbitant shipping prices. So it was, to anyone that had any level of Forge World in any of their collection, whether it was 40K or Fantasy back in the day, that was like, oh my god, that's like so amazing. You actually have that Forge World model, and the quality was super on par. Really high quality figures. Detail has always been really good in Forge World stuff, and no doubt this particular model is super cool. One of the coolest dragons that I've seen out there as far as in miniature. And after all, it's fantasy, and who doesn't love dragons? So, okay, now Justin, why don't you dive into what your favorite model is or models are?
Yeah, so I, took a little bit of a different angle on things here, and I focused on, given that don't play a ton of tabletop miniatures games, focused on board games that I thought had really cool miniatures and kind of picked my favorites of that. So my first one is the Exosuit miniatures from the board game Anachrony, which is from Mind Clash Games. So Anachrony is a futuristic worker placement game where each of the players takes the role of one of these factions or paths that is trying to sort of gain dominance in a post-apocalyptic, just destroyed world. And one of the aspects of the game, you have to send your workers out into the kind of wasteland, destroyed areas, which are very hazardous, to take actions. So you have to use exosuits. In the retail game, without the miniatures expansions, your workers are sort of small hexagonal-ish chips, or sorry, not chips, but cardboard tokens. And the exosuits are just a sort of standard hex tile. And so to send a worker out into the wasteland, you put them in the exosuit by just setting the human worker on top of this hexagonal exosuit tile and go put them out on a space on the board. But they released this exosuit miniatures for this as well, and so you get these nice big plastic minis. What I really like is that the miniatures, well, essentially totally aesthetic, have a mechanical function in the game, and they have a slot built into the top of them where you actually slide the worker token into them to like put them in the exosuit, and then you take the whole thing and you go stick it on the board where you're going to go do an action or whatever. So I appreciate that, like, sort of mechanically and thematically, the miniature has some function in the board game. So I think that's really cool. I think my favorite one of the different miniatures is one of the paths is called the Path of Domination, and they're kind of a seafaring faction. And so they have these robotic squid exosuits with these 6 thick robotic tentacles. Reminds me of something from like the Matrix, and each of the minis is like this little squid bot thing. So that's my number one, my first pick, I think, the Path of Domination miniatures from Anachrony. My other pick is also from a board game. This one's from Blood Rage, which is a Viking battle game, for lack of a better word, I guess. And in the game, you are sort of a clan of Vikings, and you're trying to take over areas of the land and eventually sort of gain glory and death and ascend to Valhalla, that kind of thing. One of the aspects is you can basically get access to these huge monsters to fight on yours on the behalf of your clan. And so the coolest one for me is the Fire Giant mini from that. It's just this huge muscular giant kind of gray skin and has this, I don't know, I guess almost like Aztec golden armor that he's wearing. And then just has this massive flaming like broadsword thing, which like physically got the flames modeled at the end of the sword. It's sort of partly solid, partly actual sculpted flame. And it's like as big as the entire height of the miniature itself. And, again, in the game, getting access to one of these monsters is just a huge like combat advantage. And so it's just really satisfying to slap one of these huge figures down on your board. Like, all right, now I'm fighting with this guy. So it has some in-game use for in that sense too, of like, this is my big boy right here. Plus they're just really beautiful detailed models. All the models in that Blood Rage game I think are really nice. Even the smaller like Viking models I think are really well modeled. Blood Rage from CMON Games.
Those ones actually come painted and everything, or are they bare?
No, they don't come painted.
I see.
But there are some real nice painted versions you can, check out on Board Game Geek or, different miniature sites and stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
There ain't no pre-painted miniatures in this list.
You never know.
All right, Brian, what do you got? What are you gonna knock us out? Knock this thing out of the park. What are the most amazing models out there for you?
Oh, I don't know about that. I kind of went a little bit of a different way in there. Like, I was too intimidated to pick something like what the best model ever would be. Like, there's so many good models out there and stuff like that. So really focusing on more like what my personal favorite was to me. I definitely focused on my own collection of what I have. I ended up picking out Mounted Vampire Lord. That's kind of the actual name for it. It's kind of been named as the Red Duke. It's an old 5th edition Warhammer model. I wasn't familiar with it till I was looking more into it for the episode, but I guess it was designed around a campaign that was out in 5th edition called Circle. Really old. I love it. Like, I'd say it's one of the more fully drawn PC project. I've had it that long and it's never seen paint, sadly. And I was thinking about it also. I probably haven't actually played it very much. Like, I know I used it way back in the day when we kind of played nonsense Warhammer when I was first getting into it, like not following the rules. But most of my Warhammer games, I never used a mounted Lord. So I don't think it has a lot of games that, even though I've had it for that long and I claim it to be my favorite model, but I think a lot of that, like, it's been in some of the backstories in both the Bretonnian book and the Vampire and Undead books, and I think that's kind of like adds a little extra background and character to the model. So that would be, I think, one of my favorite ones in the collection. I kind of had a hard time picking it out, so as like my second choice, I was kind of doing a lot of honorable mentions instead, just other ones that for some reason really stand out to me. And I guess my other Warhammer armies are Tomb Kings and Bretonnians. So I think the Tomb Kings are a really good range. Like, I think they're really popular for their look to some extent because they never really played super well. But if you're unfamiliar with the Tomb Kings, they're kind of the Egyptian-based undead of the Warhammer world, and I feel like they have a lot of good models in their collection. Like, a lot of the Tomb Kings themselves, they're just kind of like the old armored mummies. I like them a lot. Cetra, he's like the ultimate special character of the Tomb Kings, and he has a huge chariot pulled by 4 skeleton steeds. That's gotta be one of like the coolest models. That one's probably pretty close. I think my Vampire Lord won out just because I've had it for longer and probably kind of a nostalgia win there. But there's like the Tomb Queen Khalida and even like the Casket of Souls and the Ushabti are like the giant kind of statues made out like to model the gods or whatever with the different animal heads. And they have like these really cool, huge like weapons and everything. So the Tomb Kings range, I think, has a lot of good models in it. And then speaking of another one, the Bretonnians, the Green Knight is also a big classic model too. I think I didn't own that one for very long, so I think that's kind of the same thing again. Had I owned that one first, it would probably be very close to the Vampire Lord again. And Green Knight also has a ton of background story too, so I think that draws to my appeal for it as well. And it's a really cool model as far as the classic ranges go. It'd be really cool to see an updated version of it, but the classic model is a pretty interesting model. And then getting into some of the newer stuff I had, again focusing on kind of my collection, like out of all the Batman models, like I think it's kind of strange, like I had the opposite feeling with the Batman models since they're based on something so familiar. Like the minis individually didn't stand out that much. I don't have like a huge Batman collection, so maybe that's why, because plenty of them are pretty dynamic and pretty cool, but I just don't happen to own them. But I remember when I put the Batman from the Dark Knight Rises set on the Batpod, and when I finished that model, like with this huge cape and everything, for some reason I just thought it looked super cool and stuff like that. Like his cape is like super huge, and like the Batpod was kind of a fiddly model to put together. But for some reason, like out of all the ones I put together and own, like that one kind of stood out to me. And in that same vein, going at my historical collection with Bolt Action, the Warlord Resin Hellcat was kind of a similar thing to that. The Resin one, like it has all the kind of features and kit and crew molded into it already. And I don't know if I just kind of got lucky on the draw with that, but it was probably the crispest resin model I've ever had from Warlord. And for some reason, like the Hellcat's a pretty cool looking little tank. And I remember when I finished painting that one, I just thought it was really cool. And then I'm going all over the place with my honorable mentions, but from Bolt Action, Conflict 47 is kind of like their alternate history based on the Bolt Action game, and that has some kind of cool, like old futuristic, like so like high kind of fantasy tech for the World War II era. And like I have the German ones because I think they're the most interesting, but I think all the stuff in that line is pretty cool. Like I really like the Germans one the best, and that's kind of why I picked up that game, even though I don't get a lot of chances to play it. But like the heavy armored Germans in there and some of their like mech walkers and stuff were really cool. And then some of my absolute favorite models are some of them that I've converted myself, but I thought that would be kind of a silly choice for picking as my favorite model. And I think they have a lot of sentimental value to me just because I converted them myself. They've all been featured in the past on Wisco Dice as I was doing them, but I made like the Black Coach, kind of like my ethereal flying version of that, which too bad I couldn't like copyright that or something, because like Games Workshop updated their model and it's kind of in the same vein as that, so that was pretty cool that I was able to pull that off earlier. That was one of my favorite ones. And then similarly, I like kind of went crazy and made that Manfred on the kind of undead Manticore. That was like a really fun build, and I guess maybe it's even not the coolest ever, but just the amount of like care and detail I put into that makes it one of my favorite ones. And then also I made a few other, like 3 other little vampire conversions are some of my favorite models as well. One of them being my Hellsteed mounted vampire, so that's like the kind of undead Pegasus, basically. I actually kind of built that one with the Red Duke in mind, so that's kind of like my updated version of that model. And just for that reason, I've tried to put it on the table more, because I kind of made that little bit of effort converting it, and it calls back to the Red Duke model in kind of an updated way. So after way too many honorable mentions, that's kind of where my thought was going with my favorite figures.
Now it makes me think that we need to throw like a Hall of Fame or gallery on the website somewhere where you can kind of, pick your favorite ones to kind of keep up in one gallery page of show off, your cool models.
And future blog post, Brian. There you go. Get that typewriter going.
That's true. I do need to get some of that out going.
You know what? We've talked about our favorite models here, and you know what I would love to see what your guys' favorite models, whether they're from a board game, whether they're from a miniatures game, whether they're from some model kit. What are your favorite models? Show us, reach out to us on your social media or shoot us an email. Show us what your favorite models are. We'd love to see them, and if they're in your collections, so much the better. I think that's part of the hobby, and whether it's board gaming or miniatures, it's something that I think we all appreciate, is that side of the gaming side of it, with being able to visualize and get that immersion into gaming, and nothing does it seemingly better than a really cool figure.
For sure.
Yeah, so thanks guys so much for sharing. It was pretty awesome kind of going listening to you tell your stories about these, why you picked these figures and why they were cool and why they meant so much to you. And everybody's obviously going to choose different things. We have different tastes. There's nothing wrong with it, but that was pretty cool. Anyways, on today's episode, we've basically caught up on our hobby stuff. We've caught up on some of the games we're playing, and with Viscounts the West Kingdom and On Mars. We also gave you a good sampling into what our favorite models, and don't forget, we had that great interview with James. Thanks so much to Noble Knight Games and James for taking part in this. We really appreciate it, and look forward to doing more with you guys in the future.
Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you leave a review of this show wherever your favorite place is to find podcasts. Oh, and by the way, give us a like on our Facebook page. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, or Pinterest while you're at it. If you haven't looked recently, make sure you catch up on the blog at wiscodice.com. Hey, Brian, what's that site?
Ah, darn, I forget. Justin, what's our website again?
Wiscodice.com.
That's right, it's wiscodice.com. And until next time, everyone, peace out.